Very special episode today. This is a I Doubt It podcast production, and we're going to put this up on YouTube. Joining us, a little strange, usually we're guest hosting his program. This is David Pakman, host of the David Pakman program on YouTube, and everywhere there are YouTube programs disseminated. Also, the new author of a book called The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America. David, before we get started, I just want to say, I have been referenced as a big, strong man, and I come to you now with tears in my eyes, sir, to say thank you for joining us.
You know, the number of people in tears when they see me, it's either very good or very bad. I don't know.
Well, we're happy to be to face rather than just individually guest hosting your show when you're off decompressing from all the Trump news.
Yes, it's good to be here, and quite a little ecosystem that we're building in 2025, I feel like.
I'm pretty positive about it, very happy that it seems to finally, we're learning from some of the mistakes that were made during the 2024 campaign.
Us and the people who need to correct those mistakes, the people in power as well, so that's good.
More importantly. Let me ask you this. A lot of these questions I feel like I already know the answer, or at least what your answer will be, but Brittany and I have had a few conversations both on the podcast and individually in private about whether or not we believe this particular iteration of Donald Trump in governance is worse than the first. And do you think it's worse? And then if so, I have a follow-up.
I think it's worse. I mean, I can say more than just yes, but maybe the follow-up makes sense.
Well, I don't want to be the guy who asks a question just so he can give his answer. But when do you have a defining moment, or was it a series of moments that led you to like, oh shit, yeah, this is going to be a lot worse?
Well, I expected it to be worse, but when I knew it was going to be worse was about 15 seconds into the presidency, this second term, during that inauguration speech, and it's only been very downhill. And you know, maybe we'll get to it, but I know that there were some of our brethren on the left who I believe naively thought this is a changed Trump. He's going to cut defense spending. He's not going to do any military hostilities. And, you know, now in mid to late March, we're figuring out that that was naive in the end.
Yeah, similar to the Project 2025 denials, right, leading up to his election, where he was saying he didn't know anything about Project 2025. And now you have the architect of Project 2025 coming forward and saying that it's beyond his wildest dreams what Donald Trump is doing, and that every hour is, you know, what they wanted. So similar to how, you know, people on our side, like you said, kind of doubted that Trump would actually follow Project 2025, and he is. I think for me, and not to step on Jesse since he's super eager to give you his answer on when he knew things would be worse, just the rapid nature of implementing Project 2025, I think, is also very scary.
Oh, without a doubt. And you know, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out, and I write a little bit about in the book, but really it's like a 2025 conversation, is there anything that we can do to get the people that supported this guy to really reconsider what their vote meant in connecting who you vote for and what your day-to-day life is? And we got a couple of gifts in the sense, I mean, tragic stories, but about a month ago, there was this story, man votes Trump, Trump deports his wife. Mm-hmm. And then this week, we had a version of that, which is man votes Trump, ICE arrests and detains his wife, even though she's married to a citizen and on her way to citizenship. And in a way, it's like, yes, that is a direct consequence of how people voted. And I think this is part of the messaging that's failing on the left and really making this more than just some vague thing happening in DC somewhere.
Yeah, I think related to some of those cases, though, I think part of the problem that we face, and I would hope you would agree, is that the messaging element to it, the heavy lift that we all have, I think you more than me, we're stylistically just a little different, you and I, David, is that the first case, the guy kind of communicated some regret about Donald Trump. The second guy just this week was like, well, no, I would do it again. I'd vote for Donald Trump, even though my wife's freedom is in jeopardy and her ability to reside in the United States. Where do you think we could do a better job? Try to avoid telling me how to do a better job, but how do you think we as a a liberal ecosystem of messaging can do a better job to reach those people in both of those camps, the ones who do regret and then the ones who ultimately don't.
Well, if they don't regret, you're talking about a special type of person, and I don't know that they're necessarily reachable, but a couple principles I've been thinking about are, number one, I mean, this is really cult stuff, right?
Yes.
You never want to shame or embarrass people considering leaving the cult. You want to say, it's awesome that you're thinking about this. I'm so sorry how bad it was. Come join us, and one of the things that I do talk about in the book is that if you disagree on 1% of something with the left and you say, I'm thinking about voting Trump, at least when it's election time, they welcome you with open arms. Now, after they win and it's time to legislate, it's chaos. But at least for the purposes of winning elections, they welcome you if you differ with the left by 1%. We do the opposite, which is if you differ by 1%, we start with purity tests and exclusion, and I don't know that we're really part of the same movement. And so that's one thing I've been thinking about. The other is there is this common thread for cult followers, cult members, and I think you really have to use that sort of scholarship to analyze MAGA, that they do often think that they always will be exempt from whatever. And so even though one of the Trump voters regrets and the other doesn't, in retrospect now, there is this idea that, no, when he talked about going after the migrants and the immigrants and the visa people and all this stuff, it couldn't have meant my partner because I'm showing loyalty, I'm voting, I'm checking the boxes. And so I think reminding people that you won't be exempt when the rubber meets the road is maybe another important aspect to this.
Going back to the purity test, I did feel like that was a little bit of a possible, just a vicious attack on yours truly. Do you think I called for, with all of the weight and the heft of my influence, David, I said that Chuck Schumer must resign for his complicity in what he did the other day with the budget. And do you think that would be a purity test, or do you think that there's some efficacy in realigning our leaders at this point in time?
No, well, we need to realign our leaders, and this for me is not really about the continuing resolution. I've heard fair arguments on both sides as far as the spending bill goes, and on the one hand, there's the who ultimately gets the blame, and that calculation. On the other hand, there's the how can you be the party that always says, when we shut down government, people suffer, and then you are now going to do the same thing. I think that there are arguments on both sides.
Sure.
I think what I'm most motivated by is, if you are ultimately going to go along with the continuing resolution, I would want two things. Number one, to get something really tangible for it that you can then go back to your constituents and really Democrats in general and say, look, we did not need to bail them out. We do think that keeping government open is the right thing. Here's what we got. And by the way, if it did shut down, here's all the ways in which people would have suffered. Maybe there was some way to do that would have been a little more tangible and salient in terms of what went down. But if I zoom out, I think current Democratic leadership really has to go. And these are not folks who have shown themselves to be able to know how to win power in 2025, the way that politics and media works right now.
It also seems confusing when some Democrats are talking about there being a constitutional crisis. Even during the election, right? Kamala Harris in her final town hall said that Donald Trump was a fascist. And when they're using very strong language, but then their actions don't seem to match the language that they're using, have you generally been not pleased with how the Democrats have been tackling things like Elon Musk's, coup, overreach power? What would you rate the Democrats in terms of their performance?
Very poor. I mean, I'm hearing rumblings now from my extremely poorly placed sources in the Democratic Party that there's going to be some very small group of Democrats, someone from the House, someone from the Senate, someone representing the governors, that are going to try to figure out how do we turn what should be the easiest midterms to absolutely dominate into actually that, rather than just a mediocre performance. But I think the performance has been very poor. I also think, the stuff with the court right now and just defying the court order and saying the planes aren't turning around, we're just doing it anyway. This is a real test, because of course Trump's going to try it, because he's gotten away with every damn thing. Why wouldn't you just keep trying stuff? But does the judiciary have any teeth? Is there any way to create some repercussion here? Because if there isn't, of course it's going to get even worse, because why wouldn't they? There's no check or balance here.
Yeah. Well, getting to the book, again, the title, The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America. Did you find that your job, that some people may or may not know about as a YouTube commentator for many years, was that kind of the basis of your research, or did you sit down at your computer and really dive into other sources?
It was really a combination of both. I mean, I weave into the book a bunch of original research that I did just for the book.
You did the weave?
I was doing the weave, and you never know where you're going to end up necessarily. I might end up bringing Nicky Jam on stage in the middle of the book, So, like, for example, my audience knows that my general framework is, I think social democracy is the best system. I think it's shown itself to be, which is a regulated form of capitalism, more regulated than we have in the United States. But I wanted to go further, and everybody talks about Sweden, everybody talks about Denmark, but there's other really interesting examples of different sorts of countries. So Portugal, the Kerala state in India, Uruguay in South America. There's other examples of successes, and it really was interesting to find out that, intuitively I knew that when Republicans say, we can't do the stuff these countries do because those countries are homogenous or those countries are smaller or whatever, these are terrible arguments that we have the facts on our side to rebut. And so I learned a ton writing this book.
Well, a big piece of what you talk about, too, is critical thinking and people developing strong critical thinking skills to take on some of the misinformation from the right wing. And I guess a general question is, do you think that people on the left are better at critical thinking? I think I hear that somewhat frequently from people on the left that call into the podcast and will say that it's unique among people on the right, their inability to think critically. So is the left better at doing that?
The left is better, but by a very small margin. That's the truth. And, I really am not trying to be political in the sense of partisanship. The left is a little bit better, and there's a couple of studies I talk about in the book. One of the big media literacy skills is, can you distinguish fact from fiction? And so Pew Research did a study, which I cite in the book, which just gave people 10 different statements and said, check the ones that are opinions and check the ones that are facts. And so, for example, if I said, chocolate is the best flavor of ice cream, we all know that is an opinion, right? And so Democrats were a little bit better than Republicans at identifying the statements of fact and statements of opinion, but not by a lot. And so I think that margin is largely explained by blue states have slightly more Democrats than Republicans. Red states have slightly more Republicans than Democrats. The margin depends on the state, right? Utah is different than Florida. And overall, education systems are better in blue states for the most part. And so I think that difference comes from that reality, but it's not like an 80-20 thing by any means.
It's good to hear that you really leaned in on empiricism. So this isn't just a book of opinions from David Pakman. You know what I mean? There's some basis to what you're saying. And piggybacking off of the idea of critical thinking, there's been all this talk about the left. We need a Joe Rogan on the left. Speaking of lack of critical thinking skills, what's your response when you hear people talk about needing a figure like that on our side?
I think we need an ecosystem, and one of the things about the left that's different than the right is, and this is really more of a fundamental difference, the left doesn't really deify our elected officials the way that the right does. Now, I know every time I say this, Republicans go, oh, what about Obama? Obama was very different, inspirational in a very particular way, did have a Trump-like effect of bringing a lot of new people into politics. But once he was in the Oval Office, it was he's scaling up the drone war. He's not as progressive as he ran on. So it's a different thing. And so I struggle with the idea of a left-wing Joe Rogan because I don't think the left resists the idea of the one person. And whether it's Trump or Rogan or whoever, we just don't really want that same thing. So I'm thinking more about it as an ecosystem. And when it comes to the elected officials, well, it'd be great to have a dozen great people that we say these are the leaders. When it comes to media, I think we need all of us, right? I mean, it's what we're building out right now. And there's, a dozen of us in the core circle, and then there's another dozen that are in the periphery. And so I think that the ecosystem is more than the individual here.
Am I in the core circle, David?
You're in the core circle. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think if anybody were to map on, I don't believe that the left as a political movement needs a Joe Rogan, but if anybody right now in this moment were to map on and be that analog to Joe Rogan, or the opposite, it would be like a Bill Burr type of character who's funny and represents masculinity and all this shit, but is also pretty much espousing. I mean, he's saying free Luigi at events and stuff. He's decidedly not a right-wing conspiracist. So I don't know.
The other name that comes to mind to me, and the risk of this, purity tests, right? You say a name and 5% of the audience doesn't like it, and that's who you hear from. But I do think that Scott Galloway is interesting in he fits the more stereotypical masculinity persona. He's done very well in business, but he's not a billionaire, right? He's wealthy. He's done very well. He considers himself more of a moderate, but on what I consider really like the core issues of economic justice and the way our economic system should be organized, he has the right ideas. And so I think someone like that is interesting in a lot of ways.
I think more importantly, also, he communicates. That hit he did on MSNBC where he left those fucking people speechless was chef's kiss. Beautiful.
Well, in chapter 6, you write about how to fight against a movement that has no policy. And I think this is one of the more fascinating aspects of the right wing right now, which is that it's not necessarily guided by principles. It's really molded in the image of Donald Trump. And he can completely shift public opinion within the Republican Party just based on a statement that he gives from the White House. So without, reading your chapter aloud, grabbing a book from behind you and reading the chapter aloud to us.
Those are cookbooks.
Oh, okay. Can you give us just a taste of how you fight a movement with no policy priorities?
Well, you really do have to set your own agenda. And this is what I think the Democratic Party has not done particularly well, which is that it's extraordinarily reactive, and it ends up debating in shades of gray the agenda items that are established by the right wing and MAGA and right wing media on their terms. And I think that this is fundamentally a losing place to start. You also I sort of write about this in a different chapter, but it's related. You don't want to get sucked into these first principles debates where they love to give me your view on ethics and morality and markets in a complete and total vacuum. And part of it is you don't necessarily solve real problems in 2025 by telling you whether Hume influenced me. but like maybe more importantly, they abandon their principles as soon as they're inconvenient. So what does it even matter, right? I mean, they're against business regulation and government involvement in business until they want to force social media to publish COVID disinformation. And they want, a Tesla infomercial. I love Tesla on the White House lawn. And all of a sudden they do want government involved in. So my point is, don't waste time when they don't even really care about the principles once they become inconvenient.
It also reminds me of something about the Democratic Party, which is that they always talk about how we need a strong opposition. They always talk about how we need a strong Republican Party. And I just feel like, what message is that sending, that you keep saying that you need a strong opposition? Shouldn't you be worrying about yourselves and making sure that your party is strong and that you are advancing something, worth listening to, that is convincing people to vote for you?
Yeah, I think like in one day, if the right people got together, a sort of new way of talking about that could be developed. And the way that I would approach it, and by the way, they don't even really have to talk about this, but if they want to talk about opposition, the way I would think about it is, listen, when we have one party rule, historically, bad things happen. And so what we want on the left, in the progressive movement, in the Democratic Party, is not just everything we say goes with no checks, balances, or opposition. What we want is a counterpart that is sane, where we can start with the facts and then figure out what the policy should be, rather than this kind of buffoonish extremism where law and order is ignored, convention is ignored, checks and balances are ignored. That's not a reasonable counterpoint. Does it make sense when we want to regulate more to have some voice that says, don't go too far with that, and then as reasonable people we have a conversation? Awesome. Does it make sense to have a side that says we err on fewer taxes, so that when one side says we want to add these 5 taxes on these different things, someone says let's figure out whether this makes sense? That's fine. But the generic, like, we need the opposition in the way that you're describing, when the opposition is off a cliff, we're not really virtuous when we call for that at all. And I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, well, and Jesse likes to talk about this thing of the past where they keep saying my good friend across the aisle. And it just seems like everyone else is able to stand back and say, okay, that seems to have passed. So why are you all, still trying to hold on to something that no longer exists?
Yeah, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert are calling each other little fucking bitches on the floor of the House of Representatives. Why are we tripping all over ourselves to hold on to this political order that used to exist but no longer exists?
Yeah, and to a degree, they debased and degraded the political discourse starting in 2015 when Trump came down the escalator and said a lot of Mexicans that come to the U.S. are rapists, right? We can't now always be expected to lift it all back up. We have to deal with them where they are, and where they are is the low road. And that doesn't mean we take the low road, but we don't pretend that we can get them back onto the high road.
Yeah. Well, listen, before I give you an opportunity to tell everybody where they can go buy multiple copies of The Echo Machine, How Right-Wing Extremism Created a Post-Truth America, here's the most hard-hitting question of your appearance here. Which of us is the best guest host? Don't fuck around.
According to my audience, they love Brittany.
Yeah, of course they love Brittany. Of course.
I'm so honored.
Everybody loves Brittany more than me. I love Brittany more than me.
Okay, now that was kind of you getting out of the answer, though, David. I mean, you went to your audience, but now we need to follow up. What does David think? No.
I'm struggling. I think I'm getting like a weird echo.
You're gonna pull my ear. Audio's dead. Well, listen. Where can everybody? I would recommend it. I've just started reading it. Brittany's a little farther in than I am, and so far, I'm very impressed again with the research you've done, with the facts and the data that you provide. That it's not just opinions that have rattled around in your head. Where can people pick up the book?
Every normal place you would expect to find books, the book is available. But if you want a signed copy, Brookline Booksmith in the Boston area has them. There's like 150. I signed 1,300 of these things. Ooh. You should see what that will do to your wrist, Jesse.
Oh, you mean you didn't use an auto pen?
These are valid. These are not void and vacant because they were not signed with I used Sharpies.
That's important.
So if you go to davidpakman.com/booksmith, if that link works, there are signed copies available. But, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any local bookstore can get it. I'm also going to sign some at a bookstore TBD in Austin very soon, and I'll tell people where those will be.
Awesome. Very cool.
Well, listen, we appreciate you very much. You've been very kind to us, and congratulations on 3 million subscribers. God damn, that's
awesome.
Fantastic,
yes.
man.
I appreciate that, but the other thing that we're all seeing is look at the number of channels now over 1 million, right? I mean, the ecosystem is growing where it used to be just the Young Turks over 1 million for years, and then that group started to grow and grow and grow. So I appreciate the congratulations, but also the group is getting really big right now.
Yeah, I'm trying my best to signal boost and lift smaller creators up, because I do think it's important. I don't look at this as competition between my channel and yours, or ours and Luke Beasley, or any. I think, or mine and Brittany Page, who it does amazing stuff.
Listen, I'm trying to promote people on my very massive channel as well.
Well,
so.
I credit you with how David got to 3 million. So I don't know how David feels about it.
I know, yeah.
I completely agree.
Thanks for joining us today. As always, we very much appreciate you, and I think everybody should get a copy of your book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.